Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 7 of our reading of Guinevere by Sharan Newman. As always, we're going to go over the copyright information here. This is copyright 1981 by Sharan Newman, and I have the author's permission to read this book on my channel. Written permission. And if you need that documentation, just ask for it, and I can give it to you. In the last part of our reading, Guinevere was sent off to, kind of a farm, or what they call a retreat, with Gaia and Timon. And it's a place where they don't allow meat and stuff like that. It's really going to be an interesting experience for her. But anyways, we are going to see where we left off here. Oh, I remember. We can probably read this again. The years went by in peace and earth untroubled, unharried by hoe or plowshare, brought forth all that men had need for, and those men were happy. Cherries or black caps, the edible acorns. Spring was forever, and a west wind blowing softly across the flowers no man had planted. And so there were rivers of milk and rivers of honey and golden nectar dripped from the dark green oak tree. The story had always been dearer to her than those in the Bible. She had been studying the Metamorphosis all summer and loved it. She could almost see the happy men and gods laughing together in the untainted forest. The oak across from her shimmered as if about to pour forth the golden nectar. Streaks of sunlight dappled the air. Guinevere murmured the words, the rich Latin softened by her British tongue. The stillness was perfect and beautiful in her eyes. She awakened some time later with the feeling that someone was watching her. She had felt very often recently that it made her vaguely uneasy. She had been dreaming again, something heartbreakingly joyous, and it had hurt her to wake. There was only a wisp of her dream left, something about mingled silver and gold and the feeling of great speed and freedom. She tried to grasp it a moment longer, but it was gone. Timon and Gaia had a strict rule that meditation must never be interrupted, and that was probably why no one had come looking for her. But she feared that they would be angry to think she was shirking her duty if she stayed away too long. She hurried, gathered her robes about her, and tried to smooth her hair. As she left, she thought she heard a sound as of some large animal in the woods behind her. She turned to look. There was a thicket of bushes and vines to the left of the path. The leaves shivered. She saw a splash of silver, and then it was gone. She made her way back slowly, wondering. She had no fear of this thing, only deep curiosity and a strange longing. What can it be, this silver light? Why does it follow me but never let me catch it? She returned to the same place for the next few days, but she saw nothing more. After a week or two, Guinevere became accustomed to the pattern of life at a hermitage, and oddly enough, she found that she enjoyed it. She wasn't given much work to do, and she could hardly continue to resent having to wash dishes to help prepare the meals, when her hosts, as well-born as she, did so too. She grew to love Timon, who had at first seemed so huge and menacing. He was a gentle, easygoing person with no pretensions, either of holiness or nobility. He rumbled about in his garden or among his bees in perfect contentment. Guinevere preferred working with him, even though it was more strenuous to staying in the dark hut, enduring Gaia's silence and accusing stares. Gaia always spoke civilly to Guinevere and was never unkind, but her whole manner was as forbidding as if she had raged at the child and beaten her. There was an air of bravery. There was an air of barely controlled passion about Gaia, which Guinevere, who liked her emotions placid, never seemed to get used to. So she made a habit of offering to help Timon in the garden every morning. He made her a hoe from a stick and a sharp stone, tied together with a complicated array of knots, and he helped her whittle a shorter stick into a dibble for planting winter grain. Why don't you make it longer? She asked. I know I have to keep bending over, and it hurts my back. A lot of reasons, he told her, with a grin. It's good for man to bow over the earth. You can see it better. You can smell its richness, and as you look down, you can give thought to the words of the Scriptures. Dust ye be, and unto dust shall ye return. That is gruesome, Guinevere said. I am not at all sure that I came from dust, and I don't mean to think about turning back into part of someone's garden. He laughed again. I find the thought rather pleasant myself. One day I shall be part of the corn, making bread for unborn children to grow strong on. However, I trust you won't need to consider the matter for many years to come. Nevertheless, it will do you no harm to kneel close to the earth. Your eyes are more often on the sky. Guinevere took the reprimand from him meekly, even though she once would have been furious if anyone other than her parents had spoken to her so. It's not just the sky that I look at, she tried to explain. The sky itself is boring, so empty and constantly blue. But the clouds racing across the sunlight, the changing patterns they make on the leaves and grass, especially when the wind is wild. Sometimes when I lie under the great oak tree at the top of the hill over there, when the sun is bright and the wind dancing all about, I believe I can hear music. She stopped a moment to see if Timon was laughing at her fancy, but his face showed only gentle understanding, so she went on. The ground contains many marvels, I know. I have considered the mystery of the blade of grass and the blind earthworm. She sighed. Their priest was very fond of drawing morals from the least of God's creatures, but there is something about the things that move freely upon and above the earth that pleases me more. When I see a flock of geese screaming above me or catching a deer in the woods a moment before it leaps from sight, I don't know. I ache for them. I want to sprout wings or hooves and follow. She paused a little embarrassed. She had never told anyone of that before, had hardly put into words herself, until she came to the hermitage. Her days had been too occupied to allow her more than the vaguest feeling of longing for. For what? She smiled shyly at Timon. He smiled back in perfect understanding. How old are you, Guinevere? 13 last month. Ah, his voice was tender. You are growing up, not just in your body. Everyone must do that, but in your heart. There are new questions that your childhood answers won't fit. You are beginning to feel the force of the world beyond yourself. Well, I've always thought that in this well-ordered universe, there must be answers for everything somewhere, if we know how to find them. Just don't grieve if the answers don't seem to be the right ones. You might not be asking the right questions. Guinevere nodded amiably and went on hoeing. She understood little of his philosophizing, but enjoyed hearing him speak. Long years later, she would remember his words when the questions became dire and the answers were all wrong. One morning, a few days later, they were surprised to hear the sound of a horse approaching up the narrow path. Guinevere rushed out with an expectant smile. Surely it was someone here to see her, perhaps to bring her home. But as the rider came nearer, she realized that this man had never been to Gwendolyn's home. He must have been a monk. He was wrapped in a brown robe that may have once been gray wool, but had probably only felt the touch of water when its owner had been caught out in a storm. In the bright sunlight, the filth ground into it shimmered a slimy green. Guinevere wondered if she would be obliged to receive a kiss of peace from him. She shuddered. The hands holding the reins were nearly as grimy as the robe. She heard Gaia coming out behind her, and sensed from the sudden gasp that she was not pleased with the visitor. Either Gaia was as repulsed by filth as she was. Suddenly, Gaia strode past Guinevere, brushing against her roughly. She held up her hand as if to repel the man as he drew nearer. "Begone!" she shrieked. "You are no longer welcome in our house, Ninius. We warned you never to return." The horse halted. The man threw back his hood, revealing a fine Roman nose and eyes startlingly blue. Nothing more could be seen of his face for the brown mat of his beard which covered it. His hair stuck to his forehead and glistened like his robe. He smiled. His teeth were stained and crooked. "Now, Gaia," he whispered, "you have no call for such a lack of hospitality to a fellow Christian." Guinevere started. His voice was cultivated and proud, each word formed as if chiseled in stone. Gaia grew stiff in her rage. "Christian! The word is desecrated by your tongue, tempter, purveyor of filth, hypocrite. Go at once, return to your decadent world. You shall never cross our threshold again." His smile faded. "You are as close-minded and foolish as ever, Gaia. I will go if you really wish it, but I do not come alone, my dear. I have brought many worthy friends with me." He patted the leather bag slung behind him. "Look, my Gaia," his voice caressed her. "Gospels, saints, lives, even a copy of Pastoral Care, and the new one by Boethius. Wouldn't you like a discussion with Dame Philosophia?" His leering eyes never left hers as his fingers fumbled with the strings of the bag. Gaia stood stiff with hatred, and yet seemed almost mesmerized. Violently she pulled her face away from his gaze. She threw a last epithet at him over her shoulder and raced back to the hut. She stumbled over the lintel and yanked the door shut behind her. Timon had arrived to see her exit. He strode up to the monk, his face more stern than Guinevere had ever seen it. He grasped the reins tightly and turned the unresisting horse back down the trail. "See what you have done to my poor sister," he chided. "Why do you return to torment her?" "Do you see what your sister has done to me?" Ninius answered. "What other men would wait as I have for so many years." "Only a fool," Ninius, Timon added. "Only a fool. You know Gaia better than anyone left on earth, and yet you come here, every year, bringing the two things which tempt her most. You are cruel beyond words." "Cruel? Foolish? I am not the one. Let her ask God what she has made me go. Made of me through. Sorry, let me reread this. Cruel, foolish, I am not the one. Let her ask God what she has made of me through all these years. Would he not have planned better things for us both? It is she who is the fool to waste our lives, and you for supporting her in her insanity. Bah, I'm sick with it," he ended suddenly. "I'll be back next summer, and the next, and every year, until I am too feeble to climb the path. She will give way yet. Goodbye, Timon. Watch over her. God and eternity will show us who the fools are." Guinevere had stood astonished throughout the interchange, and she might have been a tree in the forest for all the attention everyone had paid her. She only started to come to life again after Ninius and his horse had disappeared once more into the trees. Timon turned around and only then seemed to realize that she was there and had witnessed the entire scene. He came and put his arm around her gently. From inside the hut could be heard the sound of wild, bitter sobbing, choked in vain. "Let's walk for a time, Guinevere," Timon whispered. "She doesn't want us now." The day was ripening, and the woods about them were busy with the scurry of birds and animals. Summer would soon be over, and the squirrels were busy filling hollow trees. They didn't care about strange human grief. Everything was prepared for the winter. A hard one, Timon guessed. The birds were already migrating weeks ahead of their time. They wondered quietly for a while, both pondering what had happened. Finally, they came to her space in the woods, the little stone seat beneath the tree. He motioned her to sit and then paced back and forth across the clearing several times before he decided to speak. "You need some explanation for this, and I will tell you only if you realize that it is a sacred secret, never to be spoken of again, even to me. Above all, you must never let Gaia know that I told you. Do you understand?" She nodded. He stood for a while trying to find words to explain. How could she understand? Finally he began. "Gaia has truly loved only two things in her life. Books and that man, Ninius. She cares for me, of course, but not the way she loves him. Yes, still she denies it, but I know she could live happily without me any time. Perhaps that's why she doesn't send me away, too. You can't imagine how she was when she was younger. I was always the stupid one, strong but not much for learning. In another time I been bought sub might have been bought sub command of a legion. I'm glad it was too late for that. But Gaia, she was brilliant and so beautiful." "She still is," Guinevere interrupted. "Yes, she is still both. And that is her great grief. It's all the fault of that philosopher Pelagius. When his theories came to her, she dove in, arguing them with every scholar who visited. I don't understand them. Even if I did, I don't see that it much matters whether Christ was man or God, or a bit of both. Then most preachers came, each one gloomier than the last, all telling us how to live a Christian life and divest ourselves to the worldly goods. Divest ourselves of the worldly goods we love so sinfully. Gaia listened and debated and read the scriptures and all the commentaries she could find. In the end, she got the idea that she was doomed to everlasting torment if she did not give up the ways of the flesh. But hot baths and cool wine never mattered to her. It was all Ovid and Lucretius and Plutarch and Virgil and, of course, Ninius. She wouldn't think he was... You mustn't think that he was always like that, all filthy and smelling. He does that. Well, I don't really understand that either. Anyway, he was once a nice, clean-shaven Roman and a brilliant philosopher, too. They were bothered by their own decision, and our families were pleased. They seemed to be very happy in their own argumentative way. But then she decided that if she loved a thing, it must be sinful. She kept fretting because she couldn't get close to God while so surrounded by the world. She gave up all her books, even the scriptures. She says that if she reads even one holy word, all the wicked, voluptuous ones will all come back to her. She daren't even be near a book. Every waking moment she prays that the longing will be taken from her, and although she had never said a word, I think she fears that if she even lets Ninius pass over our doorstep, her longing for him will be too strong to deny. Guinevere sat listening, wondering. She couldn't understand why anyone would want to give up someone they loved, or that anyone could love something so much as to fear it was idolatrous. Gaia's sobbing still echoed in Guinevere's heart as she felt a strange thrill of pity for her. Suddenly Gaia was human. Timon saw her sitting there so innocently, her forehead wrinkled with the effort of understanding. He worried about her. "Guinevere," he said earnestly, "if you ever decide to devote your life to God alone, be sure you do it because you love him more than anything else. Not to deny your love for something of this earth. The earth isn't so awful, after all. God made it, too." He shook himself, having said his piece. Again, Guinevere was reminded of a great shaggy bear. He smiled at her. "I should finish the story. When Gaia turned 18, Ninius wanted to be married at once. He said that they had already waited longer than was necessary, but then she decided that since living with Ninius was what she wanted most, she had to get away from him at once. So she came up here. We all fought her. Father even tried to bring her back by force, but nothing worked. In the end, they sent me up here to watch out for her. She thinks still that I only remain because of my promise, and that is another of the burdens she carries." He chuckled. "She can't believe that I'm happier here with the animals and the bees than I ever was with all those educated Romans. Well, that's all. We've been up here nearly 20 years. Ninius declared that if she wouldn't marry him, he would become a monk too, but he wouldn't give up books for anyone, so he travels around the world hunting for manuscripts that can be loaned for copy and brings them back to Britain. Gaia won't even look at one, but every time he returns, he comes here first, hoping to break her down. Guinevere listened with growing wonder. It was a very romantic story, but silly somehow. What good was Gaia to God up here? Miserable? She felt vaguely that there must be an answer somewhere, that something in Gaia's beliefs had gotten turned around and a word would set it right. But it was beyond her. She shook her head and smiled at Timon, who was kneeling, breaking up a clod he had kicked loose, crumbling it until the soft dirt ran between his fingers. You won't mention this to Gaia now, he cautioned again. She thinks she's fooled everyone into thinking she's abandoned her early desires years ago. It would shame her terribly to think that others knew her weakness. She is the strongest person I've ever met, Guinevere answered. I know I wouldn't have the courage to say a word to her. You mustn't be afraid of her either, you know. She has a good heart. It just never occurs to her to use it. They went back to their work, hoeing the beans they had planted when Guinevere arrived. Already the first tiny leaves were unfolding, close huddled to the soil. Guinevere had never noticed these precarious beginnings before. This first fragile advance from the dark ground into the sun and wind. It amazed her that they throve so that anything so tiny could have a chance. When Timon reminded her that even the great trees around them had started as seedlings, she flatly refused to believe it. He laughed at her. Do you think they just sprang full-grown from the earth one morning, complete with bark and branches? Well, I suppose you think that I arrived in the world 6 foot tall and wearing a beard. She considered. Do you think I think you must have? She walked around him, staring up at this great mane of hair tumbling over his broad chest and shoulders. She could never have been a fat, limp, pink baby. Her imagination, never great, could not conceive of this at all. He roared in delight at this limit of her thought. So be it then. I can't argue with you any more than I can with Gaia. Let us simply tend our gardens and leave speculation to the scholars. They continued their work in companionable silence. In the hut, Gaia cried until she fell asleep. Chapter 6. Sorry about that, my foot had gone to sleep. Now, anyway. The days slid by, summer waning as the garden flourished. Guinevere had long since meshed with the rhythm of Timon's work cycle. She trotted after him, tending bees, cultivating the soil, exploring the forest in search of its treasures. He often gave her some small job to do quite alone before she would have felt put upon. But now she accepted the responsibility as an honor. She hunted for early berries and gathered the angelica to steep with honey and water for mead. Her time of solitude grew more precious to her than she ever could have imagined. In her special meditation spot, she felt most at peace. There she would sit motionless for hours, waiting. Sometimes she sang to herself or chanted poems. At first, these were by the Latin poets or the church fathers, but they seemed jarring and too civilized for such a place. So without noticing it, she began to chant the old British songs, the ones the people who worked in the fields knew. She had heard them repeated every year, each in its own time. The farmers and fieldmen, the potters and weavers, the dairymaid and the stable hand all knew the proper songs. One to call the wind upon the hot afternoon, one to make the name of one's true love appear in the water, another to protect the new calves from sickness, more to bring the deer to the arrow. Flora had hummed them all to her when she was a child, and more. Perhaps the old woman thought she was too young to remember, but they were her first music, and they were forever printed in her memory. One day, on a deep sunny morning, she found herself sitting in the warm grass, pungent with the smell of rotten fruit, and she began to sing the prayer for bringing flowers from the earth. Flora would start humming and reciting it to herself every winter solstice, and kept on until midsummer's day. Sometimes when she had thought herself unwatched, Flora's hands had moved over and upon the brown, barren ground in certain patterns. Guinevere thought it was a kind of dancing for the fingers and had learned to imitate it in her room, but she had never tried it out of doors. near summer's end with life already blooming flamboyantly about her. The grass quivered as she touched it, and she smiled. A comfortable warmth ran through her hands, like that which comes from spiced wine by a winter's fire. She sang low and caressingly, in the same loving tone in which Flora had sung to her. She could sense the movement of growth far under the green mat. Nearby, someone watched her with joy in its sorrowful velvet eyes. The time is coming, it thought. She will be ready to find me, and for a while our lives will run together. I will no longer be alone for a time. A giant crystal tear sizzled in the grass. Guinevere finished her song with a laugh. She patted the grass she had just blessed as if it were a pet kitten. Then she realized that it was nearly time for breakfast, and she had promised Timon that she would help make a new hive. As the bees were getting ready to swarm, she skipped from the glen without a backward glance. Behind her, an orchid broke from the earth and reached toward the sun. Occasionally, when Gaia was thoughtlessly cruel or Timon very busy, Guinevere wondered what Geraldus when Geraldus would come back for her. She worried that they had forgotten her at home, learned to live without her. She didn't panic. It was just something that settled at the back of her mind and caused her lower lip to stick out. She usually forgot it a moment later, so great was her contentment with her life, but still, she would sometimes stare through the tiny front window at the stars and wonder if anyone missed her. She needn't have worried. In the midst of trying to feed and entertain what seemed a whole company of soldiers, the petty lords, Gwendolyn missed her terribly. The minute the men had come galloping across the shallow stream, horses sweating and armor gleaming, she had known that they had been right to send her away. They weren't quite barbarians, after all. One had to remember they were fighting for Rome. A few were even moderately well-mannered, but they were soldiers, trained from childhood to kill in battle. And when life consists of taking up a lance and shield and charging into a dirty, bloody melee every few weeks, there is not much time for gentility. These men constantly showed it. Certainly showed it. They wore their muddy riding boots to dinner. They drank their wine in long gulps. Their voices were too loud, and their language a bastard Latin. Merlin was right in saying that few could read their own names, and even though strict orders had been sent down, more than one serving maid had deep purple bruises beneath her thin robes. We're going to put this in right here. We've been reading from Guinevere by Sharan Newman. This book is available for sale where books are sold. Its sequel, the Chessboard Queen, is also available, and Guinevere Evermore, also available at most book retailers. Anyways, we've been reading Guinevere by Sharan Newman. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload, and if you support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.